Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. Imagine a city where water rose up from the ground with almost no effort, where every home had its own well built from fired bricks that held their shape for millennia, where streets were gridded, drains lined in symmetry, and the people disappeared without ever writing a single known word. That city is Mohenjo-Daro, beneath a scorching modern sun in southern Pakistan. On a windswept mound surrounded by rice fields and cotton farms lies the outline of a civilization forgotten for thousands of years. And what you see as you walk along the excavated bricks is not a temple, or a palace, or the tomb of a king. It's something far more boring. A drain, an alley, series of houses with nearly identical plans, quiet courtyards, and perfect water access. No one ruled this city from a throne that we can find. There are no large sculptures of gods, no gold-covered tombs, no swords or murals glorifying conquest. And yet, what they built methodically, anonymously, and across a vast landscape still sits in place more than 4,000 years later. When British engineers rediscovered Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s while surveying for railways, they didn't think they had found a city. It looked like a ridge of earth, a formation of natural hills. But soon, bricks began to surface. Not just bricks, but thousands of them, identical in size, shaped with remarkable consistency. These weren't the chaotic mud bricks of later empires. They followed a 1:2:4 proportion, 1 unit thick, 2 wide, and 4 long. Fired in kilns, they resisted erosion, survived monsoons, and whispered something startling. These people built to last, but not to boast. Archaeologists unearthed neighborhood after neighborhood, public baths, yes, private latrines, yes, granaries, wells, courtyards, everywhere, but temples, royal burial grounds, statues of pharaohs or emperors, nothing. This city, one of the oldest urban centers on earth, does not appear to have been ruled by visible kings, or, if it was, their egos never made it to stone. And perhaps that's why Mohenjo-Daro was left out of history books for so long, for most of recorded time. Empires loved telling their own stories. Rome's scrolls, China's dynastic records, Mesopotamia's clay tablets. They all narrated power. They named generals, eclipses, victories, and curses. But the Indus Valley, their script remains undeciphered. And in Mohenjo-Daro, no royal propaganda survives. Instead, what survives is an urban planner's dream. A city laid out in a grid with streets running north-south and east-west, central drainage lines built with inspection holes and spillways, wells, more than 700 of them, each attached to a home or shared between neighbors, a giant communal bath, now called the Great Bath, with steps descending into a sunken brick pool, waterproofed with bitumen. And beneath the bath, a sewer system that still astonishes engineers today. This was not just a place for bathing. It was likely sacred. But sacredness in Mohenjo-Daro came with plumbing and runoff drains, not with incense and altars. Who built all this? We don't know. What were their names? Not a single deciphered word tells us. They had a script etched on small stone seals, but those seals show symbols, perhaps sounds, perhaps images that no one today can confidently read. What we do have are clues in clay. A unicorn-like animal appears again and again. A woman surrounded by trees, a horned figure seated cross-legged, and short strings of symbols that repeat across hundreds of miles. From Mohenjo-Daro to Harappa, to Lothal. But not one single Rosetta Stone has ever been found. And so, the story of the city must be told through infrastructure, not inscription. And what an infrastructure it is. In one neighborhood, often called DKG area, archaeologists discovered a row of single-room houses, each with a raised platform at the back, used perhaps for sleeping or storage. Some homes had tiny staircases leading to flat roofs. Almost all had access to water, either from private wells or communal ones a few steps away. At the end of the street, a covered train, sloped for gravity flow, built from brick and capped with stone slabs that could be lifted for cleaning. In other words, sanitation was not an afterthought, was foundational. Even the refuse was managed. Some buildings appear to have had trash chutes. Others had depressions outside their entrances, maybe for washing feet before entering. And at the city's edge, a large granary near the riverbank, with air ducts beneath the floors to keep grain dry, grain that would have come in from the countryside, meaning Mohenjo-Daro didn't just feed itself. It likely served as a collection hub, maybe even a trading post. But trade with whom? Here's where things grow more mysterious. Artifacts from Mesopotamia, specifically from Ur and Lagash, show up with Indus seals stamped into the clay. Carnelian beads, typical of the Indus, show up in Iraq. And Akkadian texts speak of a place called Meluha, filled with exotic woods and rare animals. Meluha may very well have been the Indus Valley. So the people of Mohenjo-Daro were not isolated. They were global, or at least regional. Sailed boats down the Indus River, likely all the way to the Arabian Sea. They built cities on coastal inlets. They sold ivory, timber, cotton, and lapis lazuli, but they did it without kings, without armies we can see, and apparently without monuments to themselves. And then they were gone. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus cities began to decline, not with fire or conquest, but with slow erosion. Bricks were taken, reused in nearby villages. Floods silted over the streets. River courses shifted. The trade routes collapsed. By the time later civilizations like the Vedic or Persian empires took over the region, Mohenjo-Daro was already a mound, a ghost of a city, a mystery. No one knew who had built it, and without stories to tie it to a nation or a religion, it faded from cultural memory until a British railway engineer noticed the bricks. And so now, you can walk its streets. You can touch the walls. You can see where water once flowed, where people once slept, where pots were stored, and waste was flushed away. But you cannot know their names. And perhaps that's the quietest tragedy of Mohenjo-Daro. What kind of world would build such a city, leave behind no voice to explain? Why? You are now standing deeper within the ruins. A little further into the southern portion of the city, what archaeologists call the lower town. Unlike the raised platforms and imposing granary of the upper town, this was where the ordinary people lived. Not peasants, exactly, not nobles, either, but residents of a city so perfectly laid out that it's still unclear how decisions were made. There are no signs of a palace, no large villas to suggest social hierarchy. No inscriptions that say, I am King So-and-so, or this street belongs to the priest of the moon god. Instead, there are long rows of similar buildings, some larger, some smaller, but nothing that screams dominance. And that's the problem. For centuries, archaeologists and historians alike expected all great civilizations to follow the same basic script: divine kingship, monumental art, war records, tombs. The Indus people left behind none of these. There are no ziggurats like in Mesopotamia, no pyramids like in Egypt, no statues, no god names carved in stone. Even their burials are modest: a few pottery jars, a necklace, comb, in most cases Their dead were cremated or simply left unmarked. This has baffled generations of scholars. Were they egalitarian? Did they rule through councils or merchant guilds? Or did they simply venerate authority in ways we no longer recognize? In the uniformity of their bricks, in the order of their drains, in the precision of their measurements? The truth is, we don't know. But here's something we do know. They were good at measuring. Small weights made from chert, a hard, brittle stone, have been found across Mohenjo-Daro and other Indus cities. These weights follow a binary system, that is, each weight is twice as heavy as the one before. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, up to 64, and beyond. It's the same system you use every day without thinking. In computer code, and they standardized it across thousands of miles. A bead maker in Dholavira, a potter in Lothal, and a merchant in Mohenjo-Daro could all agree on price using these weights. That means not just trade, but trust. An economic system working without central inscriptions, without known currency, without taxation records. That's the hidden brilliance of the Indus world. They seem to prioritize function over flourish, uniformity over spectacle. But why? Why did a civilization that mastered city planning, trade logistics, and water engineering leave no literature, no grand narrative, no myth of beginnings? The seals offer one possible answer. Hundreds have been found, small, square stones etched with animals and symbols. The unicorn-like creature appears most frequently, though it's not a real animal. A kind of composite beast. The seals show bulls, elephants, tigers, sometimes human-like figures in yogic postures, all accompanied by tiny inscriptions just 5 or 6 characters long. But here's the catch. No one has cracked the code. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, we don't have a bilingual inscription to compare. And unlike cuneiform, there's no long text to analyze frequency and grammar. We don't even know if it's a language or a system of tokens, maybe indicating ownership, trade origin, or commodity type. Some researchers believe it was a protoscript. Others argue it was never meant to be read phonetically at all. If the Indus people did write literature stories, poems, prayers, none have survived. Perhaps they used palm leaves, which rot. Perhaps they used cloth or bark. Or perhaps their stories were always oral, passed from grandmother to grandchild, and never written down. And then came the decline. Around 1900 BCE, Mohenjo-Daro began to fall apart. Not suddenly. There is no archaeological evidence of invasion, no mass graves, no scorched walls, but slowly, layers of silt began to dominate the upper layers of the site. Some homes were abandoned, others filled in with flood debris. Drainage systems clogged. The perfect order began to break. Rivers shifted course, especially the Gagar, believed by some to be the now dry Sarasvati. Earthquakes may have changed water tables, and, with fewer trade links to Mesopotamia, which itself was collapsing, under pressure from the Elamites and Amorites, the economy of the Indus cities weakened. People moved eastward, inland, toward smaller settlements. The great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro dwindled. And the seals, the script, the entire urban tradition disappeared from the archaeological record. For nearly 3,000 years, the Indus Valley was forgotten when the Vedic texts were composed. The Rig Veda and others, they mention no cities. They speak of rivers, fire, gods, hymns, sacrifice, but nothing resembling Mohenjo-Daro. It's as if it had never existed until 1922, when an archaeologist named R.D. Banerjee spotted the shape of baked bricks poking out of a mound while exploring ruins along the Indus River. What followed was one of the most astonishing rediscoveries. In modern history, teams from the Archaeological Survey of India began excavating. John Marshall, director of the ASI at the time, announced to the world that a new ancient civilization had been found, one that rivaled Mesopotamia and Egypt in age and sophistication. But the news didn't shake the academic world as expected. Why? Because Mohenjo-Daro lacked the things Western historians considered proof of civilization: a king, a god, a war. It was in every way too peaceful, too sanitary, too anonymous. Even the skeletons uncovered were few, about 40 in total. Not enough to suggest a massacre or plague. It's just enough to suggest maybe a slow decline. So who were these people? Tell they left behind no temples, yet built sacred baths. No cathedrals, but perfect granaries. No statues of deities, but thousands of toys, carts with wheels, small animals carved in clay, marbles, rattles. Somehow, the absence of monuments, they still managed to leave behind one of the most advanced urban civilizations of the Bronze Age. A city where water flowed through homes, but no swords were found in them. Where streets were clean, but myths were missing. Where you can see every brick, but never meet the bricklayer. How did they organize themselves? Were they governed by elders, merchant councils? Did they rotate authority? Or were there rules so embedded in culture that power became invisible? And perhaps the real question is, did their invisibility help them endure longer than most kingdoms ever did? The dust settles gently across the bricks of Mohenjo-Daro. They lie in quiet rows, warm beneath the sun, washed now and then by the Indus rains. It is a city so old that no one remembers its name, not even those who built it. We call it Mohenjo-Daro, a Sindhi name that means mound of the dead. But that name is new, perhaps only a few centuries old, bestowed by locals who found skulls and skeletons in the ruins and assumed a great calamity. But the calamity, the king, left few scars. No signs of burning, no smashed city walls, no treasure hoards hastily buried. Instead, the city simply stopped. There are places where the streets are half swept, as if someone was cleaning them and never returned. Pottery kilns with vessels left inside, water jars near staircases, and in a few rare corners, skeletons still curled in alleyways, not in battle, but as if they lay down one day and were never disturbed again. We know that around 1900 BCE, many of the great Indus cities began to decline. Some scholars call it a urbanization. It didn't happen all at once, and it didn't happen everywhere, but the precise grid layouts became less common. The weights and seals disappear from the archaeological record. Brick sizes, once standardized across the entire civilization, become irregular. That's the kind of detail archaeologists notice. Not fallen kings or burned temples, just sloppy bricks. Why? That remains one of the oldest and most unanswered questions in South Asian history. One explanation lies in the river. The Indus, like all great rivers, is a shifting force. Over centuries, it moves east, then west. It floods, it silts, it cuts new paths through the landscape. And the Ghaggar-Hakra River, thought to be one of the great arteries of Indus civilization, dried up entirely in some regions. Cities built beside these rivers depended on predictable flows for farming and trade. When the waters changed, so did the cities. But rivers aren't the only explanation. There's evidence of changing rainfall patterns, too. The monsoon may have weakened over several centuries, shrinking the growing seasons. Crops became harder to sustain. Livestock suffered. People may have migrated slowly in response, moving eastward toward the Ganges plain, where smaller village settlements eventually gave rise to new cultures, new rituals, and new languages. And then there's the theory of trade collapse. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and the port city of Lothal had strong ties to Mesopotamia. Indus seals have been found in Sumerian cities like Ur and Lagash. A Mesopotamian tablet even mentions Meluhha, believed to be the Indus region, as a land of luxury goods, carnelian beads, timber, ivory, But around 2000 BCE, Mesopotamia entered a period of upheaval. The third dynasty fell. Trade networks faltered. Without foreign demand, the Indus cities may have faced economic stress, especially the artisans and merchants who depended on external markets. Still, even these pressures don't explain everything. What's most strange is not that the civilization declined, but that it disappeared so thoroughly from cultural memory. Civilizations fall all the time, but usually they leave echoes. The Sumerians were remembered by the Babylonians. The Egyptians left pyramids, and their language evolved over centuries into Coptic. Even the Hittites, once lost, were remembered in the myths of their neighbors. But no later Indian text mentions Mohenjo-Daro. Not the Vedas, not the Puranas, not the epics of the Mahabharata or Ramayana. Nothing. It's as if the Indus people walked away and no one followed. This has led to many theories, some sensible, others speculative. Some suggest that the Indus Valley was conquered by newcomers, Indo-Aryan speakers who migrated into the subcontinent. But there is no clear evidence of invasion, no layer of destruction, and the DNA evidence from Indus skeletons shows a complex mix of ancestries, not sudden replacement. Others believe the Indus script was lost because it was never widely used, that perhaps literacy was confined to a priestly class or a merchant elite, and when their institutions collapsed, the script vanished with them. Still others suggest that the Indus Valley people did survive, just not as city dwellers, that they became the village farmers and pastoralists of northern India, blending into the culture that would eventually become Vedic, then classical Hindu civilization. But we may never know, because we don't have their words. What we do have are bricks, drains, wells, toys, seals, and bones. It's not much, perhaps, but it's enough to rebuild a quiet vision of their lives. Imagine a day in Mohenjo-Daro. The sun rises gently over the brick rooftops. Merchants lift their shutters and arrange beads in long, neat rows. Potters fire their kilns. Children run barefoot through the lanes, chasing clay wheels or balancing on ledges. A woman climbs down her private staircase into a courtyard, drawing water with a rope basket. She humps to herself, splashes her face, begins her morning tasks, grinding grain on a stone slab, patting out dough down the street. A bead maker polishes carnelian using emery paste and a copper drill. He learned this from his father, who learned from his grandfather. Their family seal has the unicorn on it, their mark of trade. Near the great bath, a group gathers. Some climb the steps into the pool, purifying themselves, not for bathing, not for luxury, for ritual, for rhythm. The sound of water is sacred here. There are no temples, but there is order. No palaces, but there is peace. And then, slowly, something shifts. Maybe the river changes course. Maybe trade dries up. Maybe the rains become erratic. People begin to leave, not all at once, but over years. The brick walls begin to crack. Drains go uncleaned. Wells dry. The last child leaves behind a toy bull on the step. The last merchant closes his shutters and walks away, carrying a jar of beads he'll never sell. In the city falls asleep, not destroyed, not buried, just quiet for 3,000 years, until a British officer walking along the Indus sees something odd in the soil, until archaeologists begin to dig and find not a ruin, but a ghost. Today, Mohenjo-Daro is protected, though not perfectly. Rising groundwater, salt deposits, and tourism all threaten the ruins. The Pakistani government has made efforts, but conservation is expensive, fragile. Sometimes you wonder if the city wants to be remembered, or if it prefers the silence. What's certain is this: the Indus Valley was not a forgotten backwater. It was one of the four great river civilizations of the ancient world, and yet remains the most mysterious because it spoke in symbols we can't read, because it built cities without kings, because it left behind everything except a story, and perhaps the end. That's the most unsettling thing, that civilization can thrive for 700 years, build great cities, conduct international trade, and leave almost no trace in the texts of later peoples, as if silence itself was their legacy. And so the question lingers. Did they intend to vanish without a name, or did we simply forget how to listen? It begins with bricks, sun-baked, modest, unadorned, yet shaped with such mathematical precision that even after 4,000 years, they stack into walls without mortar. Each brick of Harappa was molded using the Indus standard, a 1:2:4 ratio, height, width, length, consistent across 1,000 miles and dozens of cities. The recipe was shared, the measurements agreed upon, the pattern never broken. These were not the bricks of chance. They were the bricks of a civilization that measured time, space, and civic identity with equal care. Harappa is not a household name today. It should be. It was one of the twin pillars of the ancient Indus Valley Civilization, alongside Mohenjo-Daro, while the latter dazzles with its great bath and iconic pre-skiing sculpture. Harappa whispers in gridded streets and shadowed ruins, telling a quieter story, one of disciplined systems, astonishing restraint. You would not find a palace here. No grand temples, no colossal statues of warlords on horseback, no lion-headed deities towering over the city square. Instead, you find drain pipes, standardized weights, carefully placed granaries, and bricks, always bricks. Harappa sits along the banks of the Ravi River in what is now Pakistan's Punjab region. Like Mohenjo-Daro, it thrived between 2600 and 1900 BCE. Its neighborhoods were laid out with a practical elegance. Streets followed a grid. Drainage systems ran beneath them. Wastewater was channeled away. Homes had their own wells and bathrooms. Even poorer houses were served by public drainage, a civic engineering feat that would not be seen again for thousands of years. But what makes Harappa remarkable is not just its infrastructure, it's the absence of what we expect to find in ancient civilizations. No pyramids, no ziggurats, no fortresses that boast of military might, no massive tombs to honor the dead, no stele of kings proclaiming divine right. In most ancient cities, power was carved in stone. In Harappa, power was diffused, or at least hidden. We find standardized seals with animal motifs, unicorns, bulls, elephants, but none show men wearing crowns. We find weights and measures used across regions, suggesting strong central coordination, but no inscriptions naming the coordinator. We find evidence of large-scale urban planning, but no blueprint or manifesto to explain it. And most curiously, we find cooperation. The entire Indus civilization, which spanned more than 1,000 settlements from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, appears to have operated with a shared cultural and architectural logic. They used the same writing system, the same brick ratios, the same urban forms. They built similarly shaped houses with central courtyards. They buried their dead with modesty. No pyramids, no gold. It raises a quiet but powerful question. Can a civilization flourish without kings? There are theories. Some scholars believe the Indus Valley had kings, but they left no monuments. Others think authority was local, perhaps managed by merchant guilds or councils. Some even suggest it was a hydraulic civilization, governed by the engineers who managed water, the true lifeblood of the cities. Still, others believe that religion played a unifying role, not the kind we recognize, not temples run by priests who controlled offerings and absolution, but perhaps a quieter, more decentralized faith, one where ritual was personal, scattered through wells and fire altars, not staged in colossal temples. And here in Harappa, we get glimpses of this, glimpses that don't answer questions, but deepen them. Consider the granary, a structure once thought to store grain, with massive platforms and ventilation shafts. It's built on a raised brick base next to what may have been a public plaza or market. But there's no direct evidence of grain storage, no chaff, no husks. Was it symbolic, administrative, ceremonial? The name granary may mislead more than clarify. Nearby are circular platforms believed to be used for threshing grain, or perhaps craft production. Clay figurines of bulls and carts suggest trade, labor, transport, but again, no records, archives, just patterns. One of the most enigmatic artifacts of Harappa is the dancing girl, a bronze statue, just 4 inches tall, found not in a temple or palace, but in what seems to have been a residential area. She stands with one hand on her hip, the other resting on her thigh, chin tilted up, confident, casual, alive in a way few ancient sculptures are. She wears bangles, dozens of them. Her hair is braided, her body is lean, with an assured, almost teenage defiance. She doesn't represent royalty. She doesn't represent a goddess. She seems like someone you could have seen walking down a Harappan street, barefoot, humming a song. It's not the art of power, it's the art of people. Even the writing system, still undeciphered, resists authoritarian narrative. Most inscriptions are short, just 5 or 6 characters, found on seals, pottery, tools. They may have identified owners or marked goods for trade, but they don't tell stories. No long proclamations of kings or gods. No epic poems carved into stone. Functional signs, always brief, always reserved. This has led some researchers to suggest that the Indus script wasn't used for literature at all, only for trade or accounting. If true, it implies a culture more interested in logistics than mythology. It's more bookkeeper than bard. And yet, the signs appear everywhere, carved into ivory, stamped on seals, etched into copper. Whatever they meant, they mattered. And someone was literate enough to make them consistent. Still, when Harappa was rediscovered in the 1920s, archaeologists expected to find what they were trained to see: kings, temples, conquests. What they found instead was order, quiet, repetitive, efficient order. It baffled them. The British archaeologist John Marshall once noted that there is nothing in this civilization that is comparable to anything in Mesopotamia or Egypt. He meant it as a puzzle, even a complaint. He couldn't recognize what he was looking at, but perhaps that is the point. Harappa defies our expectations because it doesn't fit our myths of progress. We think civilization must rise from conquest, hierarchy, monumentality. Harappa suggests another model, one where cities grow from consensus, shared standards, and quiet coordination. There's no evidence the Harappans built their cities with slaves. No evidence they fought large wars. No grand tombs to honor god kings. Instead, they built cities for living, not for dying. So why did Harappa disappear? The decline is visible. Bricks become sloppy. Drainage is neglected. Trade wanes. The writing system disappears. Some believe ecological factors played a role: changing rivers, declining rainfall. Others point to the collapse of long-distance trade with Mesopotamia. Still, others suggest internal changes, a breakdown in civic coordination, or a shift in political or spiritual values. But one of the more poetic theories is this: they simply moved on as the river changed. The people followed. As trade routes shifted, they adapted. The cities faded, but the culture persisted, absorbed into rural life, village traditions, and oral memory. And so, Harappa fell asleep, brick by brick, drain by drain, until British engineers stumbled on the site while laying a railway in the 19th century, pulling ancient bricks to use as ballast under the tracks. For decades, no one realized what had been destroyed. Even now, we know only a fragment of what Harappa once was. Most of the city remains buried. Some parts may be permanently lost. And yet, from what remains, a quiet image emerges, a civilization that built with care, that chose standards over statues, that hid power in procedure, not proclamation, one where the bricks, not the kings, told the story. So the question lingers, what kind of civilization builds with such perfection and never writes its name in stone, in stone? In the soft clay of Harappa, archaeologists often uncover something peculiar, not just the expected shards of broken pottery or flattened beads of faience, teas, but things left just so. Rows of bricks perfectly aligned, tools still resting near, kilns, broken walls rebuilt using old bricks, but in slightly different ratios. A clue that someone tried to preserve an old order even as the standards began to drift. And this slow unraveling revealed something crucial about Harappa. It didn't fall in fire or flood. It unraveled. But to understand how this unraveling occurred, I must first understand the breadth of its tapestry. The Indus Valley Civilization, of which Harappa was a central city, was vast, stretching from the dry edges of eastern Iran to the fertile banks of the Yamuna River in northern India, and from the towering hills of Baluchistan down to the coasts of Gujarat. It spanned over 1 million square kilometers. At its peak, it likely supported 5 million people, more than any other contemporary civilization. But unlike Egypt, which grew around a single river, or Mesopotamia, which developed between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus world was multi-centered. There was no one capital, no royal tombs at the heart of everything. Instead, dozens of large cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, Lothal, each carried the torch of civilization in their own way, using the same bricks, the same measures, and possibly the same silent script. And yet, no city claimed dominance over the others. No war chariots carved into the walls. No murals boasting of battle. No monuments to kings. Even the city walls tell a different story. Harappa's walls, for instance, were tall and thick, but not in the style of a fortress. They may have protected against floods rather than foreign armies. Perhaps they were used to separate industrial quarters from residential zones. Some walls had platforms where carts may have been loaded. In this way, Harappa feels less like a militarized state and more like a carefully tuned mechanism. A clock without a face, always ticking. Within these walls, neighborhoods were planned. Houses were built with sun-dried bricks arranged around courtyards, many with their own wells, not just for the elite, but often for common families. Even the public drainage was astonishing. Sloped, covered drains that emptied waste far outside the city. To build such a system required planning, labor, and coordination, but not necessarily kings. Could it be then that Harappa and its sister cities functioned through something like a civic contract, a tradition, an urban code passed not by decree, but by custom? One theory suggests that the civilization was organized through merchant networks, that trade, rather than tribute, was the glue of society. There's strong evidence for this. Harp weights, made of chert and meticulously shaped, have been found at dockyards in Lothal, trading posts in Mesopotamia, and even as far west as Bahrain. These were not casual exchanges. Italian standardization, value systems, commerce. The Indus Valley may have been an economic web rather than a political pyramid. This might explain why their cities look like spreadsheets, efficient, modular, repeatable. And perhaps this is why we find no statues of kings, because no kings were needed to enforce obedience. Trust lay in systems. Identity lay in the common code. But even systems must be maintained. And by 1900 BCE, something had begun to strain the invisible threads that held this world together. Clues are scattered. In later layers of Harappa, bricks lose their standard ratio. Streets are no longer repaired. Drainage is clogged. Wells go dry. There is also evidence of change in the river systems. The Gagarhakra, often identified with the ancient Sarasvati River, may have begun to dry. The Ravi, near Harappa, changed course. Some cities may have lost their water source. Others may have suffered floods. Trade declined. The flow of goods to Mesopotamia dwindled. Foreign seals vanish. Local pottery styles shift. And here's something telling. People didn't abandon the cities all at once. They shrank. New houses were built atop old foundations, but smaller, cruder. Public infrastructure was reused, sometimes patched in desperate ways. It's as though the civic fabric frayed slowly, not torn by war, but worn by time. Even the writing disappears. The Indus script, never fully deciphered, vanishes from the record after 1900 BCE. It's as if an entire literacy was quietly forgotten. No final inscription says goodbye. And yet, even as cities like Harappa faded, the culture didn't vanish entirely. Elements of it persist in village planning, in craft traditions, and the emphasis on hygiene. Even today, some Indian and Pakistani villages echo the layout of Harappan towns. Central courtyards, small wells, communal spaces. Some scholars believe the people of Harappa didn't perish. They dispersed, moved eastward, merged with incoming cultures, became the rural foundation for later Indian civilization. But what they left behind in Harappa is remarkable. A civilization that mastered urban living without lords or legends. A society that engineered systems not for spectacle, but for life. And still, as you walk the remains of Harappa today, the silence presses in. There are no inscriptions boasting of victories. No gravestones of rulers. Bricks, aligned, mathematical, persistent. So what happens to a civilization when it refuses to build monuments to itself? Does it disappear from history? Or does it endure in more subtle ways? In customs, in habits, in clay figurines buried under modern railway lines? As archaeologists continue to study Harappa, they do so with increasing humility. It is not just the absence of kings that baffles us. It is the presence of something else, a different way of organizing life, one that modern societies, with their obsessions with borders and banners, still struggle to understand. It's easy to write history when there are names and dates. Harder when there is only brick and drainage. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the most sophisticated cities are the ones that leave no heroes behind, only clean streets, shared wells, and memories carved into fired clay. So now the question becomes, if Harappa was not ruled, but coordinated, not forced, but agreed, then who held the city together when the rivers began to shift? The first thing you notice when you walk the outer lanes of ancient Harappa isn't what remains, it's what's missing. Door frames without doors, courtyards without pots, steps leading up to rooms that have no roof. Not destroyed, but quietly undone, as if someone was taking apart the city piece by piece, not fleeing in chaos, but packing up. Bricks carefully removed, reused elsewhere. Mud walls allowed to dry and crumble. Wells left uncovered. It's not the signature of a city sacked by war. It's the footprint of departure. And yet, for a civilization that left behind such vast cities, the Harappans left no monuments explaining their exit, no final stele, no funerary mound, no lamentation etched in stone. Instead, what we have are small signs, shifts in pottery styles, broken trade links, subtle changes in craftsmanship. Together, these suggest a long, slow ebb, civilization receding like a tide. But why? There's no single answer. It's a cluster of interlocking causes, some climatic, some cultural, some quietly geological. One theory speaks of the rivers. The Indus, like all great rivers, is fickle. it changes course, floods its banks, retreats. The Gagar-Hakra, possibly the legendary Sarasvati, dried out entirely. Cities that once relied on steady water lost their lifeline. This wouldn't have caused immediate collapse, but over decades, it might have made agriculture harder, trade routes tougher, wells less reliable. In some layers of Harappa, you see signs of increased aridity, thicker silt layers, clogged drains, shallow wells. The city seems to have adapted for a while, but only just. Another clue lies in the bricks. For centuries, Harappan builders used a precise ratio for bricks: 1, 2, 2, 2, 4. The length, width, and height. That ratio wasn't just aesthetic, it was a shared standard, a sign of order. But in the later layers, that standard breaks down. Bricks become thinner, more irregular. Some are recycled, some made poorly. To the casual eye, this might seem like nothing, but to archaeologists, it's a red flag. It shows a breakdown in shared norms, in coordination, and when coordination breaks down in a system built on order, things fall apart. Perhaps the administrators left. Perhaps the artisans grew scarce. Perhaps the trust that held the city together, not laws, not kings, but consensus, began to fray. Then there's the mystery of the script. The Indus script is small, etched on seals, tokens, amulets. No grand inscriptions, no long texts, but it's everywhere until it isn't. After 1900 BCE, the script disappears. Some believe it was a merchant script used for trade, not poetry. When trade declined, so did writing. Others suggest cultural shifts, new people arriving, old traditions fading. But again, there is no burning library, no scorched archives, just absence. The Indus cities shrink, not explode. By 1800 BCE, many are ghost towns. The people don't vanish. They migrate to smaller villages, to the east, to the Ganges plain. They take their tools, their pottery techniques, their quiet order. It's not extinction, it's diffusion. And what remains? Harappa. There are no giant statues, no tales of gods, but there are beads. So many beads, etched with delicate lines. They tell of trade, of fashion, of a love for detail. These beads turn up in distant lands, Mesopotamia, Oman, Bahrain, carried by traders who spoke no shared language, but who understood the value of craft. There are toys, little carts with wheels, clay figurines of animals, spinning tops. Not grand, but intimate. There are bones of cattle and sheep buried in neat refuse heaps, leftover lentils in grain bins, even seeds from date palms, suggesting trade with dry western lands. And there are bathrooms. Yes, bathrooms. Private toilets. In many homes, connected to drainage, covered drains in the streets. This wasn't a society of spectacle, it was a society of infrastructure, and so its collapse is harder to see. There are no burning towers, no sieges, just slowing, drying, crumbling. And this might be why it vanished from our textbooks, because history likes drama, likes kings and conquests. Harappa offered neither. Its clean streets, orderly brickwork, and a system that worked until it didn't. Even its rediscovery came late. For centuries, the ruins of Harappa were mistaken for rubble. In the 1800s, British engineers even used Harappan bricks to build the Lahore-Multan Railway. Its ancient history turned into ballast. It wasn't until the 1920s that archaeologists realized this was not a provincial outpost. This was a metropolis, one of dozens. By then, it was hard to reconstruct what was lost. The script remained undeciphered, the people unnamed, but still, the bricks remained, aligned, reused, repeating, then in them. A whisper of a civilization that chose not to immortalize individuals, but systems. A civilization that lasted not because of force, but because of standards. And perhaps, in their quiet disassembly, we learn something about our own fragility, that when shared systems erode, even slowly, the structures we depend on follow. So, what happened to Harappa? It didn't burn, it didn't fall, it was carefully taken apart, which might be the most mysterious ending of all. And so, we ask, if the ruins of Harappa tell no story of war, but only of withdrawal, is that not a story worth telling? You can still walk the ancient city of Dholavira. Its walls remain, not ruined towers or scorched battlements, but long, low outlines of careful stone and baked brick. There are water tanks that haven't held water in over 3,000 years, steps carved with obsessive precision, and streets that once pulsed with quiet life. And there is silence. A silence so wide, you can hear the wind brushing through the salt bushes. This is not a city destroyed by war or abandoned in haste. It is a city undone by something quieter, the retreat of water, the slow collapse of rivers, the exhaustion of soil. Dholavira sits on an island, Kadir, Bet, surrounded not by ocean or lake, but by the salty emptiness of the great Rann of Kutch in western India. Today, it feels like the edge of the world, but thousands of years ago, it was a hub, part of the Indus Valley Civilization, a thriving port town nestled between rivers and sea channels. It was not a place of kings, it's not a place of epics or tyrants. It's like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Dholavira grew under a different idea of civilization, one that left behind no palaces, no weapons of war, no colossal temples. Instead, it left measurements, water management systems, a city grid so thoughtfully laid out that modern engineers have studied its planning with admiration and mild disbelief. When archaeologists began to excavate Dholavira in the early 1990s, they found something unexpected, not just ruins. Restraint. Every wall, every gate, every reservoir had purpose. The city was divided into three parts: a citadel at the top, a middle town below, and a lower town for workshops, homes, and trade. But none of them seemed to speak the language of domination. There were no royal tombs, no murals of conquest. Instead, there were signs that water, not war, ruled life here. Massive reservoirs lined the city, some as large as Olympic pools, stone-lined, stair-stepped, shaded. Others were smaller, carved into the city's heart like precious wells. There were channels for floodwaters, drains to redirect runoff, and sluices to catch every possible drop of rain. Inscriptions, still undeciphered, lay near the gates, hinting at administration, perhaps trade, perhaps ritual, too, but no long. Scrolls of poetry, no laws carved in stone. Dholavira did not shout. It murmured, and its murmur was about water in a desert prone to drought. The city lived and breathed by managing every ounce of moisture it could find, and for centuries it succeeded. But slowly, environment changed. The rivers, ephemeral and seasonal, began to retreat. Once, monsoon-fed channels brought fresh water from the distant air-veiled hills. Today, satellite imagery reveals the ghost paths of these long-vanished rivers, etched faintly across the landscape like veins under skin. To the ancient Harappans, these rivers were lifelines. To modern archaeologists, their mysteries written in silt. The monsoon, too, seems to have shifted, perhaps gradually, perhaps more abruptly than we think. Paleoclimate data from nearby lake beds shows a decline in rainfall after 2200 BCE droughts lengthened. Crops failed, livestock thinned, and Dholavira adapted. For a time, later layers of the city show an even more intense focus on water conservation. New tanks, deeper wells, possibly even rituals to call back the rains. But the skies stayed dry. The land grew saline. Trade routes shifted eastward. The great Indus River itself, the artery of the civilization, wandered away, changed by tectonic movements, changing sea levels, and long-forgotten earthquakes. One by one, the outposts of the Indus world dimmed. Dholavira, remote and resilient, held out longer than most. Its decline was slow, its death quiet. In the final phases of occupation, signs of urban life vanish. No more fine pottery, no more inscribed seals. The stone houses gave way to huts. The great tanks dried out. Eventually, the city was left to the wind and salt. And yet, it was not forgotten. For centuries after its fall, Dholavira was visited by pastoralists, traders, wanderers. They left little behind, a few beads, bones, bits of pottery, but enough to say, this place still mattered, even now, standing. In the dry heat, you feel it. The city didn't fail because of weakness. It failed because the water left, and without water, even the best planned city cannot survive. But what Dholavira leaves us is a model, not of empire, but of equilibrium, of planning, not for expansion, but for endurance, of understanding the land so deeply that even in the face of collapse, you try to adapt, not escape. There are no heroes here, no battles, it's just engineers, planners, stonecutters, people who believe that if you built the walls thick enough, cangled the drains just right, carved the steps precisely, you could outlast the sky. They were almost right. So the question remains, if Dholavira could thrive in a desert with no armies, no kings, and no gods, what does that tell us about what it means to be a great civilization? You can almost imagine the sounds of Dholavira in its final centuries, not the roar of invaders or the cries of panic, but the subtle changes that come when a city grows quiet. The creak of a gate opened less often, the echo of footsteps in drying cisterns, the whisper of dust drifting across a once busy courtyard. Archaeology, for all its tools and science, is still largely an exercise in listening, not with ears, but with patience. What Dholavira tells us is not loud, but it is clear if we slow down enough to hear it. In its prime, Dholavira had all the markings of a mature urban center, yet its signature was restraint. It had no grand temple, but it had a place set apart for what may have been ritual, a wide open area with a ceremonial reservoir nearby, perhaps used in festivals tied to rain or fertility. No one can say for sure. The Harappan script, found on seals and pottery across the city, remains undeciphered. Its silence is one of history's longest-lasting whispers. What we do know is this: water was sacred here, but not in the way of myth or miracle. It was sacred in the way food is sacred to the hungry. It was honored through engineering. The most striking feature of Dholavira isn't any one monument, but its scale of water planning. There were at least 16 distinct reservoirs, some dug into the rock itself, others bordered by carefully aligned stone bricks. These weren't just emergency reserves. They were integrated into the city's everyday life, lined with smooth stone steps. Many of them served as communal gathering spaces, places for people to wash, gather, exchange goods, and talk. At the city's entrance, just beyond the gateway, there is a wide structure sometimes referred to as a stadium, but no one is sure what it truly was. It's flanked by what appeared to be ceremonial water tanks, positioned with such symmetry and alignment that their builders must have considered both form and function, how the city looked, and how it lived. But the most curious find, perhaps, is the large sign near the city's northern gate, composed of 10 large Indus symbols, made from gypsum and affixed to a wooden frame. It may have once greeted visitors from afar, a welcome, a declaration, a warning, we don't know. The letters are large, over 30 centimeters tall, and were clearly meant to be seen. What they said has been lost, but what they meant, even now, feels like a quiet assertion of identity. City that wrote its own name in stone. Even as the water began to slip away, Dholavira responded with ingenuity. In later layers, we see the people carving more tanks, digging deeper wells. The materials change, Pottery becomes coarser. Signs of long-distance trade decline. No more carnelian beads from Gujarat or lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Now finely made seals, once pressed into goods for shipment, vanish. And yet, they stayed. Unlike some cities that were rapidly abandoned, Dholavira's decline stretches over centuries. This slow fading suggests that the people didn't leave all at once. Instead, they adapted until they couldn't anymore. What exactly caused the shift? That remains debated. There's no single smoking gun, no ash layer, no evidence of invasion or plague. Instead, there's climate. Around 2200 BCE, a major climate event occurred across much of the ancient world, a prolonged drought, known today as the 4.2 kilowear event. It affected the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and the early Chinese dynasties, and it likely reached the Indus Valley, beginning the seasonal monsoon that brought life to this fragile, semi-arid region, in a place already perched on the edge of sustainability. A weaker monsoon would have meant a cascade of consequences: shrinking rivers, shorter growing seasons, saline intrusion from the sea, crop failures, and so, year after year, the city likely shrank. Some moved east, toward the Ganges Plain where rainfall was more reliable. Others may have joined smaller farming communities, leaving behind the memory of urban life. Still others may have tried to hold on, perhaps hoping that the rains would return, that the rivers would find their paths again, but they didn't. And then Dholavira fell silent, thousands of years later. When excavators unearthed the site, they found evidence of erosion, but not destruction. There were no burn layers, no scattered skeletons, no toppled walls, just stillness. And yet, survival can leave quieter traces. The techniques honed in Dholavira, stepwells, rainwater harvesting, seasonal tank design, persisted in western India long after the city itself disappeared. In Gujarat and Rajasthan, even today, people build tanks that echo the dimensions of Dholavira's water systems. In dry seasons, they gather around deep, stone-lined wells, stepwells, known as boris, and descend toward the water as their ancestors did. It is easy to think of collapse as an end, but Dholavira suggests a different story. That collapse can also be a transformation. Perhaps the city didn't die. It's dissolved into a culture of memory, practice, and quiet resilience. One more thing stands out. Unlike other ancient sites that were overbuilt, or overexpanded, or overpopulated, Dholavira always seemed balanced. Its architects never walled off their water for the elite. The layout suggests a civic vision, a place where planning wasn't about hierarchy, but harmony. The city's symmetry, its use of natural slopes for drainage, the shared reservoirs all point to a society that valued order, not oppression. And as the environment shifted, they didn't lash out. They adapted. The people of Dholavira might not have had empires, but they had intention. And for a civilization that built without weapons or fortresses, that might be the more remarkable legacy. So, we return to the question: when a city disappears, not by fire or sword, but by thirst, what remains of its greatness? You are standing in the middle of an empty city, not a ruined city, an empty one. The walls are still straight. The streets are still wide. The gates still open. And yet, no voices remain. No fires are lit. No footprints are left. Dholavira doesn't look like a city that collapsed. It looks like a city that quietly walked away. What makes it all the more puzzling is how intact the silence is. Other ancient cities carry the scars of war, of conquest, of plague, or political upheaval. But Dholavira wears no such wounds. It lies beneath the sun, its bones clean and unbroken, as if its people simply folded up their lives and stepped away. What do we do with a city that left no final note? In its last phase of occupation, The people of Dholavira were no longer trading with distant lands. The once vibrant links to the Indus core had faded. Pottery became simpler, coarser. Houses were repaired with whatever materials remained. The reservoirs, once full, had gone dry. And then, stillness. But something about this stillness is strangely respectful. It tells a different kind of story. It's not one of decline through disorder, but of dignity and endurance. A people who tried to make the most of what they had until it was no longer enough. Let's pause here, because if you only look at Dholavira through the lens of decline, you miss something subtler and far more human. Resilience, even when trade routes failed, even when rainfall lessened, even when luxury items disappeared, the people stayed. They adapted. They dug deeper, built better, rationed water, and changed how they lived. And when they finally did leave, they didn't destroy what they had built. They didn't burn the city or strip it bare. They simply let it be preserved, almost by the respect of departure. This is not a story of chaos. It is a story of continuity. And here's where Dholavira becomes more than just a name on a map. Its layout meticulously planned, divided into three parts: the citadel, the middle town, and the lower town. All are laid out with such precision that modern urban planners still marvel at it. The streets intersect at right angles. Drainage systems were covered and efficient. Each zone had its own water storage and civic infrastructure, but unlike other ancient cities, where power was hoarded at the top and access to water or space was restricted, Dholavira's layout suggests shared resources, public water tanks, open spaces, wide streets, no obvious palaces, no imposing statues. It was a city that may have chosen cooperation over coercion, and that, in itself, may be one of the reasons why it lasted as long as it did. Imagine the daily rhythm here during the city's prime mornings, beginning with women fetching water from the stepped tanks, children carrying clay pots, merchants arranging goods in the sun, officials pressing seals into damp clay, and farmers returning with grain or dates or melanzias. Even melons grew here, long ago, before the wells ran dry. Then imagine the same streets a few centuries later, quieter, slower, less trade, but still functioning, still adapting. That's the legacy Dholavira left, not just stone and brick, but a template for sustainable urban living. A city that did not collapse from excess, but withdrew with restraint. Let's return to that mysterious sign near the northern gate, the one bearing large Indus symbols. It's unlike anything else discovered in the civilization. It's not a seal, not a carving, but a sign built to be seen from far away. 10 characters, undeciphered. Were they the city's name? A warning, a welcome? We may never know. But one thing is certain: the people of Dholavira believed in words, even if those words are lost to us, and they believed in water, even as the earth dried beneath them. But perhaps the most remarkable thing is this: Dholavira survived in memory, not through myths or legends, but through silence, through absence. No conquerors claimed it. No ancient texts sang of its wonders. It wasn't rediscovered until 1967, buried beneath centuries of wind-blown dust. And yet, it had never truly vanished. It had simply waited, unbothered, unclaimed. Today, as archaeologists work carefully through its remains, they find no gold, no armies, no kings, just clay, stone, water channels, craft tools, beads, a city of engineers, not emperors. So we are left with this thought: if a civilization leaves behind no grand monuments, no epic battles, no immortalized rulers, but it masters the art of living with nature, plans with wisdom, shares its resources, and exits with grace, was it ever truly lost? Or was it simply waiting for someone thousands of years later to ask the right question? That is Dholavira's quiet invitation to look beyond collapse to listen to what silence still holds, and to imagine not how things ended, but how they endured. You are standing by a dried-out dockyard. The sun is high above the salt-crusted plains of Gujarat, and the silence is deep. No sails flutter, no ropes creak, no footsteps echo on the sandstone quay. The boats are long gone, if they were ever truly there. But before the desert wind claimed this place, before the tide retreated and never returned, this was one of the oldest known port cities in the world. This was Lacha, and today, barely anyone remembers its name. It doesn't fit our image of a port city. There is no sea in sight. It's just an empty brick basin surrounded by ancient warehouses, where carefully measured fire-baked bricks line narrow drains, and faded channels trace what used to be a river. Long vanished. But once, this was a thriving harbor connected not only to the rest of the Indus Valley Civilization, but possibly to Mesopotamia, Oman, Bahrain, and perhaps places even further, known only through scattered artifacts and unanswered questions. So why do the textbooks rarely mention it? Why is Lothal a city that may have held the key to the Indus civilization's global connections, so often left out of history? Let's walk slowly through its docks and lanes, listening not for grand declarations or famous battles, but for the soft shuffling of cargo, the quiet records of trade, in the overlooked ingenuity of the ancient merchant class. Lothal was founded around 2400 BCE, and from the beginning was different, where cities like Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa were built around citadels and residential blocks. Lothal was built with trade in mind. Its most striking feature was the enormous dockyard, trapezoidal basin measuring roughly 37 by 21 meters. It was connected by a narrow channel to the now extinct Dholavira River, which once flowed into the Gulf of Kamhat. This wasn't a simple canal or water reservoir. The builders of Lothal engineered it with sluice gates and inlet channels, allowing them to control the flow of water and protect against silting, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of tidal behavior and seasonal monsoon patterns. They even reinforced the dock with kiln-fired bricks to withstand erosion. Why would a civilization build such an elaborate structure unless they needed it regularly? And what exactly were they loading onto those boats? The warehouses next to the dock offer some clues. Archaeologists discovered hundreds of tiny cubical objects, weights made of chert, ranging from tiny specks to blocks the size of a fist. These were standardized and precise, based on a binary: 20, 50, 100, 200 grams. These weren't arbitrary. They were tools of measurement used for weighing goods for trade. Now, imagine this scene. 4,000 years ago, a merchant unloads carnelian beads from a basket. Another lifts blocks of copper from a boat's belly. A third examines a basket of semi-precious stones. They measure everything carefully, weigh it, seal it with baked clay impressions, and log it into a record, probably with a script we still cannot read. And then, as the tide shifts, the goods are either carted off toward inland cities like Dholavira or Mohenjo-Daro, or loaded onto outbound vessels bound for distant, unknown coasts. Lotha. It was not a religious city. It wasn't the seat of a king. It left behind no palaces or monuments. Its strength was in trade, in quiet transactions, in the logistics of survival. That might be why it has vanished from most grand narratives of history, because it tells a different kind of story. A story not of conquest, but of cooperation. The industries here were many. The most prominent was bead making. In one of the manufacturing areas, archaeologists found dozens of circular drills, furnaces, and semi-finished carnelian beads, some so small that modern jewelers struggle to replicate them. These beads were dyed, heat-treated, polished, using a level of chemical and material knowledge that suggests centuries of accumulated craft wisdom. Other industries included metallurgy, shell carving, ivory work, and pottery. The people of Lothal made etched seals, copper tools, fish hooks, and figurines. They were not just importers, they were creators, producers, artisans, and they left traces far beyond India. Artifacts similar to Lothal's beads and seals have been found in Mesopotamia, particularly in cities like Ur and Kish. The Sumerians had a name for a distant trading partner, Meluha, while scholars still debate its precise location. Many believe Meluha referred to the Indus region. There are references in cuneiform tablets to Meluhan ships, Meluhan merchants, and Meluhan goods. Some even mention a Meluha village in Sumer, a kind of foreign enclave for visiting traders. It's possible, then, that the merchants of Lothal weren't just local operators. They may have been part of a vast network that spanned deserts, rivers, and seas, but somewhere along the way, the harbor fell silent. Why? Like much of the Indus civilization, Lothal's decline is not marked by destruction or invasion. Instead, it is gradual, carried in dust. Sediment analysis shows signs of repeated flooding, some of which may have been catastrophic. The docks, connection to the river, eventually became unusable. The Bhagaba dried or shifted course without a functional harbor. The city's primary reason for existence weakened. Later layers of the city show signs of adaptation. New drains, new construction, but the bead workshops declined. The seals became cruder. Trade waned. The weights and measures, once so precise, fell into disuse. And then, emptiness. People moved inland. The networks faded. The knowledge of tides, trade, and tidal gates, forgotten, died in 1954. When Indian archaeologist S.R.O. first excavated Lothal, he believed he had found India's first true port city. But the scholarly world didn't immediately agree. Some questioned whether it was really a dockyard at all. Perhaps it was an irrigation tank, they argued. But the layout, the spillways, the evidence of trade goods, and the sediment all tell a consistent story. This was a place built for connection, and its slow vanishing tells us something uncomfortable. The history of trade, collaboration, of peaceful commerce is far easier to forget than the history of war. We remember empires and kings. We forget ports and weights, but the people of Lothal deserve to be remembered. Not because they conquered the world, but because they connected it, quietly, diligently, with beads, bricks, and boats. So, here's a question for you to drift off with. If the cities we forget were the ones that enabled everything else to flourish, do we ever really understand the past at all? When you walk through the ruins of Lothal, you may notice something peculiar, a complete absence of monuments. No towering statues, no triumphant inscriptions, no ceremonial avenues lined with the footprints of kings. There are bricks, there are drains, there is the dockyard, silent and dry. And there are small, anonymous artifacts, carnelian beads, copper tools, shell bangles, weights no bigger than your thumb. If history had not recorded it, if archaeologists had not drawn maps, written papers, and debated theories, you might think Lothal was nothing more than a quiet village that once tinkered with stone. And yet, for centuries, this unassuming city may have been the beating heart of ancient trade. The people of Lothal had no known kings. No single name survives. No written decree has been deciphered. And that is perhaps one of the greatest mysteries of the Indus Valley Civilization as a whole, the lack of glorified individuals in most ancient cultures. The kings wrote their names on walls, on coins, on columns of stone. Their wars were recorded, their victories praised. But here, in the world of Lothal, Mohenjo-Daro, and Harappa, power was subtle, anonymous, and perhaps even distributed. The seals found in Lothal were not royal emblems. They were economic signatures, square tiles with animal motifs and a line of script. They may have marked ownership, recorded transactions, or served as identifiers in a shipping registry. But to whom did they belong? We may never know. One of the most remarkable discoveries in Lothal was the bead factory, uncovered near the warehouse zone. It contained evidence of furnaces, specialized tools, and semi-finished goods. But what's striking is how standardized the artifacts were, whether made of carnelian, agate, or steatite. The beads followed consistent measurements. This kind of uniformity doesn't arise by accident. It requires oversight, regulation, and widespread acceptance of shared standards, not by imperial decree, but likely through a network of guilds, merchants, and mutual benefit. In other words, Lothal wasn't run by a tyrant. It was run by time, trust, trade, and here's something even more curious. Lothal's layout mirrors a logic of efficiency. Streets are arranged in a grid pattern. Houses are equipped with private baths. Drains are channeled underground. Wells are built with interlocking bricks to prevent collapse. Granaries are positioned near distribution zones. The whole city feels ... designed not for spectacle, but for purpose. And then there's the cemetery. At the edge of the site lies small burial ground. The graves are modest pits lined with bricks containing simple offerings. No gold, no extravagant tombs, pottery, perhaps a bead or two, and the quiet suggestion that in death, as in life, Lothal preferred function over display. It leads to a larger question: what kind of society chooses not to elevate individuals above all? Were these people egalitarian? It's prestige-based, not on conquest, but on craftsmanship. Did wealth come not from hoarding, but from movement, goods exchanged across riverbanks, deserts, and foreign docks? The merchants of Lothal must have spoken many languages. They may have spoken Harappan at home, a language we still cannot translate. They may have spoken Akkadian with visiting Mesopotamians. They may have known Proto-Dravidian or early Indo-Aryan dialects from inland neighbors, but their most universal language was probably not spoken at all. It was measured. It was weighed. It was carved into beads and pressed into seals. It was trust encoded in trade. There is a certain humility in this, a recognition that lasting civilizations don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper. And so, what happened to these whispers? By 1900 BCE, Lothal had begun to fade. The dockyard silted up, but the river shifted course. Floods destroyed parts of the city, and while people returned, the later phases of the city show signs of decline. The advanced drainage systems fell into disrepair. The weights became inconsistent. The workshops were abandoned. There is no evidence of war, no mass graves, no signs of conquest, just a long, slow silence. It's likely that environmental changes played a significant role. The Gagger, Hacker, and other rivers that fed the region may have dried or migrated. Without water, trade became unreliable. Crops failed. Merchants moved elsewhere. The network dissolved. And when a trade network dies, cities vanish quickly. Lothal was rediscovered only in the mid-20th century, excavated in 1955 by the Archaeological Survey of India. Significance wasn't fully understood at first. Many scholars couldn't believe that such an ancient dockyard existed. It seemed too advanced, too engineered, too modern. Some suggested it was a reservoir. Others argued it was a tank for bathing. But over time, sediment analysis, drainage, studies, in proximity to tidal flows made the harbor theory more plausible. And then came the artifacts, beads chemically matched to distant mines, copper from Rajasthan and Baluchistan, shells from the Arabian Sea, seals that matched those found in Mesopotamia. A network slowly emerged from the soil, and with it, mystery. Why was this history left out? Why, for so long, did school books skip over the maritime capabilities of ancient South Asia? Why did they focus so heavily on Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China, while giving only a passing mention to the Indus. Perhaps because Lothal and its sisters didn't leave behind heroic poems or towering ziggurats. Perhaps because their language remains, unread. Or perhaps because they told a different kind of story. One where power was quiet, trade was sacred, and civilization was defined by cooperation, not domination. And yet, their legacy is all around you. Every time a cargo ship docks, every time goods are weighed, every time trade crosses invisible borders, you're seeing echoes of Lothl. Because long before global trade had a name, long before maps or customs or currencies, a group of anonymous merchants built a city for commerce. And when the tides left them, they quietly disappeared. But they did not vanish without a trace. Their bricks still measure 7 by 14 by 28 centimeters, a perfect ratio. Their weights still balance. Their beads still glimmer under museum lights. They may not have written their names, but they etched their existence in the very infrastructure of movement. So here is a question for you. As the waves of sleep begin to reach your shore, if a civilization can thrive without kings, without wars, without monuments, what else might we be overlooking in the silent ruins of the world? You stand now at the edge of what was once a bustling dock. The wind moves softly across the dry basin of Lothal's famed harbor, a space once filled not with dust, but with water deep enough to receive wooden ships laden with ivory, copper, lapis lazuli, and grain. But now there is no water, only the ghost of movement, as archaeologists first puzzled over the structure in the 1950s. The evidence resisted easy answers. Could this truly be a dock? Was it not too far inland? How had such an early people mastered hydrology, channeling tides, managing siltation, and constructing with engineered precision? But slowly, patiently, the facts settled into place. Dockyard, 218 meters long and 37 meters wide, was lined with carefully hewn bricks. The inlet channel had sluice gates to control water flow. There were spillways to prevent flooding. A series of platforms suggested mooring spaces and goods transfer stations, and nearby, a warehouse, 264 rooms, elevated on a plinth to avoid flood damage. Fired bricks layered in interlocking patterns. Massive stone weights found nearby. Terracotta ceilings that may have once bound ropes and packages, now silent. This wasn't an experiment, it was a system, and Lothal wasn't just participating in trade, it was shaping it. Evidence has emerged that Lothal merchants were in contact with Mesopotamian cities like Ur, Lagash, Silan. Cylinder seals found in Mesopotamia bear inscriptions referring to trade with a place called Meluha, a word that many scholars believe referred to the Indus Valley region. Meluhan ships, Meluhan timber, Meluhan goods, but not Meluhan names. The merchants remain nameless. Faceless, we know more about what they carried than who they were. Copper ingots from Khetri, precious carnelian beads from Gujarat, shells from the Macron coast, possibly even spices, textiles, or medicinal plants. Now long vanished from the archaeological record, and still no grand inscriptions, no stele of victory, no statue of a ruler. Instead, what the Indus world gave us, and especially Lothal, is a record of systems, standardized weights in binary progression, precise measurement tools, scripts carved carefully into steatite, seals, repeatable brick ratios, so consistent that a brick from one Indus city could fit seamlessly in another. You may begin to sense the hum of this ancient world. Not a drumbeat of war, but the quiet clatter of industry, the hiss of fire in kilns, the soft grind of polishing beads, the measured loading of boats. Lothal, unlike many ancient sites, wasn't built to glorify the dead. It was built to serve the living. And that, perhaps, is why it passed so quietly into absence. when trade routes collapsed slowly, like the tide pulling back after a long hold. The city couldn't sustain itself. The most common explanation involves environmental change. The Sabarmati River, once thought to have provided Lothal's link to the sea, may have changed course or dried up. The Harappan engineers, skilled though they were, couldn't command the river's dot without river access. The dockyard, filled with silt, trade ceased, warehouses emptied, and the merchants left. Not in a dramatic exodus, not with fire or battle, just departure. Lothal faded into quiet, and centuries passed. When later civilizations rose in India, the Vedic cultures, the Mauryas, the Guptas, they did not remember Lothal. Its writing was not preserved. Its name was not sung. Its gods, if it had any, were not adopted into pantheons. Even in the modern period, Lothal did not return to memory until excavation began in 1955. But what the excavation revealed, quietly, slowly, is how advanced a people can be without being loud. This city, founded over 4,000 years ago, had urban zoning. Public and private spaces were clearly delineated. Homes often had wells, a rare luxury in ancient times. There were soak pits, covered drains, even what appears to be an early form of a lavatory. Workshops were located near industrial zones. The bead factory was separate from the residential quarters. It's hard not to marvel at how rational the layout seems, not because they were perfect, but because they were practical. And all of it was underpinned by trust. Not trust in a deity to protect a kingdom, but trust in scales, weights, ceilings, the impersonal systems that allow anonymous strangers to trade. That's perhaps what makes the disappearance so haunting. This was a city built not on conquest, but consensus. It needed water, trade, labor, and above all, peace. And when the water vanished, the peace could no longer sustain the people. Some moved elsewhere inland, perhaps to growing settlements like Damobad or Calibangan. Others may have merged with the early farming communities in the Gangetic Plain. The disappearance of Lothal doesn't mark the end of a people, just the end of a system. But in the modern world, we've only just begun to ask, why was it forgotten? Part of the answer lies in the absence of texts. The Indus script remains undeciphered. It is small, inscribed on seals and tablets, never extending more than a few characters. We don't know if it recorded language, names, transactions, or rituals. No bilingual inscription, like a Rosetta Stone, has yet been found. And so, we remain outside the doorway, unable to hear what they said. Modern Indian history, shaped by colonial narratives, focused more heavily on Sanskrit texts, Vedic rituals, and later empires. The quiet, urban, and textless Indus Valley fell by the wayside, an awkward, decipherable prelude to real history. But the bricks are still there. The weights still balance. The warehouse still casts its long shadow. Lothal reminds us that history is not only what is written, but what is built and what endures when writing fades. And now, as you rest deeper into thought, you might ask, what other cities once thrived by rivers that no longer flow? What ports once flourished on vanished coastlines? The sea remembers what we forget, and one day it may return what we lost. Imagine a civilization that spanned nearly 1 million square kilometers, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. A civilization that built complex cities, traded across continents, engineered drainage systems, and standardized its brick sizes with such mathematical precision that you could fit one Harappan block into another city hundreds of miles away, perfectly. And yet, for all of this, we cannot read a single sentence they left behind. No prayers, no laws, no king's decree, no farmer's ledger, no love poem, no myth. All we have are fragments, dozens of symbols carved into tiny seals, baked into tablets, etched onto pottery shards and copper tools. These are the characters of the Indus script, mysterious, repetitive, and maddeningly brief. Language, perhaps, that never reveals itself. This is not because it is fictional. The script is real. So real, in fact, that we have found it in over 4,000 examples. But what remains forgotten is not just the content, it's the very act of how to read it. The Indus script stands as one of the last, undeciphered writing systems from the ancient world. It defies translation. It defies even classification. And in that silence, in that dense, compact quiet, is buried a culture we cannot hear. Let us begin not with the mystery, but the material. Most examples of the script come from seals, small, square, or rectangular pieces of steatite or terracotta, roughly 2 to 3 centimeters across. On one side, they show an image, a unicorn, a bull, a sacred tree, a man with horns in yogic posture. Beneath or above the image, a set of symbols, often 5 to 10, arranged in a single horizontal line. These seals were likely pressed into soft clay and used for stamping goods, marking ownership, or perhaps blessing cargo with divine protection. Most are found in industrial or commercial contexts, marketplaces, granaries, warehouses, and docks. A few have turned up in residential areas, and some in burial sites. There are no lengthy texts, no scrolls, no stone inscriptions of hundreds of lines. The longest known example of Indus script contains about 26 characters. This brevity is part of the problem. You see, when scholars decipher ancient scripts, they rely on certain things. Bilingual inscriptions, like the Rosetta Stone, long texts with repetition and structure, and known connections to modern languages. With the Indus script, none of these advantages exist. The language behind the symbols is unknown. There are no clear parallels to later scripts, and the texts themselves are too short to show grammar. Many researchers believe the symbols don't represent a full language at all. Time, but something more like proto-writing, a symbolic system of marks used to record names, quantities, or social roles without the complexity of grammar or syntax. Others disagree. They argue that the frequency, order, and consistency of the symbols suggest a linguistic core, that the Indus people were writing language, just not in a way we yet understand. In total, there are roughly 400 to 600 unique symbols, a manageable number, small enough to be an alphabet or a syllabary, large enough to possibly represent logograms or ideograms. Some symbols appear frequently at the start of inscriptions, others at the end. Certain combinations repeat with high statistical regularity, hinting at rules. A few symbols appear exclusively on particular types of objects or at specific sites, but every theory stumbles at the same wall: lack of context. Let's step back for a moment. Imagine a world in which the Latin alphabet disappeared, but a few thousand labels remained. Words like exit, stop, and tax pressed into concrete or scratched on signs. No full sentences, no books, no syntax, just fragments. Now try reconstructing English from that. It's almost impossible. And yet, that's the task the Indus script presents over the years. Dozens of decipherment theories have emerged. Some believe the script reflects Dravidian language, an ancient precursor to Tamil or Kannada. They cite linguistic echoes in modern South Indian languages and the survival of place names that might predate Indo-Aryan influence. Others argue for an early Indo-European tongue, perhaps even a lost cousin of Vedic Sanskrit. Still, others suggest Austro-Asiatic links, or even an entirely separate language family, now extinct. Some scholars have tried to connect Indus signs to Mesopotamian, cuneiform, or Sumerian. After all, trade existed. Perhaps writing styles traveled too. But such comparisons remain speculative. Without a bilingual key like the Rosetta Stone, no link is solid. In 2004, a major breakthrough was claimed, not by linguists, but by computer scientists. Using statistical analysis, They showed that the order of symbols in the Indus script mirrored patterns found in real languages. The symbols followed rules, not random selection. Some symbols were more likely to follow others. Some rarely appeared together. This seemed to support the idea of syntax. But what kind? The signs could represent syllables, whole words, or even grammatical particles. Without meaning, structure alone cannot save us. And yet, the Harappans left clues, just not in the form we wanted. They were methodical. Their bricks followed strict proportions. Their weights progressed in binary ratios. Their cities were grid-like, zoned, and standardized. This is not the culture of accident. So we ask, why invent a script if it meant nothing? Some historians argue that the Indus elite used writing for specific, constrained purposes, marking goods, noting ownership, recording names, not for storytelling, not for law codes. In this view, writing was a tool, not a mirror of thought. That's one reason we see no long texts. They weren't necessary. Others argue that the script was more, we've simply lost the media that bore it. If the Harappans wrote on palm leaves, cloth, or wood, those materials would have vanished in the humidity of the Indian subcontinent. A few archaeologists even suspect that writing, real, expressive, full writing, did exist in Indus culture. We just haven't found it yet. There are whispers of evidence. In 2015, excavations at Barana in Haryana revealed what might be the oldest Indus inscription yet on a potsherd, dated to over 7,000 years ago in Dholavira. Long, linear inscriptions on sandstone slabs suggest public signage, almost like city nameplates or civic markers. These are not casual doodles, but again, they are brief. And again, I say nothing we can translate. There is also the possibility, an uncomfortable one, that when the Indus civilization faded, its knowledge was not passed on. Unlike Egypt, where Greek rulers hired native scribes to maintain the temple scripts, or Mesopotamia, where schools trained generations in cuneiform. The Harappans may have left no scribal tradition. When their cities declined, their script went. With them, no one copied it, no one adapted it, and no one remembered. This raises a haunting thought. If our civilization vanished tomorrow, how much of our writing would endure, and how much would dissolve into mystery? Plastic would remain, perhaps so, wood metals, and maybe some stone. But paper, screens, drives, and servers, gone. Thousands of years from now, archaeologists might find USB sticks, book covers, and shattered tablets. But would they know the words we wrote? In that future, we would be the Harappans. Now, as you rest deeper into stillness, perhaps you can sense the sadness of a script unspoken, the longing of language that never found a listener. The Harappans are not gone. Their bricks remain. Their drains still run. Their cities, though silent, are exact. But what they said, we may never know. The more one studies the Indus script, the more elusive it becomes. Not because it vanishes, but because it remains stubbornly present. It's always there, always silent. Archaeologists uncover more seals each year, more shards etched with symbols. Yet each new piece adds to a jigsaw puzzle with no borders, no box lid to guide the picture. Instead of becoming clearer, the shape of the puzzle only grows larger. Let's begin with something seemingly simple: direction. How did the Indus people write? Most of the seals are written right to left, but some are written left to right. Few seem to go booster-fied in alternating directions, line by line, without a standardized direction. Determining linguistic structure becomes even more difficult. Then there's the question of line breaks. In most surviving examples, the script appears in a single horizontal line. No columns, no punctuation marks. If grammar exists, it's hidden beneath patterns we don't yet recognize. Even the shapes of the signs resist easy comparison. Some are abstract circles with lines, tridents, fish-like marks, loops. Others resemble objects, a comb, a jar, a stalk of wheat. But we don't know if these are pictograms representing what they look like, ideograms representing ideas, or phonograms representing sounds. For example, if a symbol looks like a fish, does it mean fish? Or does it mean life, as in Sumerian, where the word for fish sounded like the word for life? Or perhaps it's a sound, unrelated to its shape. Each of these possibilities leads to different methods of decipherment. Some scholars focus on frequency analysis, comparing which symbols appear most often and in what order. Others look for parallels in known languages, hoping for phonetic hints, but with no known names, no known gods, no bilingual inscriptions. Every theory floats untethered. Let's pause here and consider a curious detail. The Indus script vanished completely after 1900 BCE when the great Indus cities began to decline. The script disappears from the record. There are no gradual transitions. Today, no simplified versions, no adoption by later cultures. Compare that to Egypt, when hieroglyphs fell out of use. They became hieratic, then demotic, then influenced Coptic. Cuneiform evolved and eventually faded, but left traces in later Semitic scripts. In China, early logograms developed into the characters still used today. But the Indus, gone. There is no direct link between it and Brahmi, the script that appears much later and becomes the ancestor of most South Asian writing systems. Brahmi arrived suddenly, around the 3rd century BCE, well over 1,000 years after the Indus script vanished. This absence suggests something happened, a civilizational rupture, a demographic shift, a cultural reorientation. And it wasn't just the writing that disappeared. So did urban planning, long-distance trade, and standardized production. The cities of the post-Harappan period are smaller, less organized. The uniformity of weights and bricks breaks down. It's as if the Harappan world, so precisely balanced, fell apart from within, and with it, the labilior, the desire to write. Some scholars propose that the decline of the Indus civilization was not a sudden collapse, but a long, gradual shift. Climatic changes, particularly the weakening of the monsoon and the drying of key rivers, like the Gagar Hakra, may have forced populations to migrate eastward in the new lands. Priorities changed. Perhaps writing, especially if it had only limited bureaucratic uses, was no longer essential. Or perhaps the script became associated with a former elite, and was deliberately abandoned. This idea isn't new in history. Scripts have been erased before. When the Spanish arrived in the Americas, they burned Mayan codices, associating the glyphs with pagan beliefs. When Chinese emperors rose to power under new dynasties, they occasionally banned characters used by rivals. When the Western Roman Empire fell, literacy plummeted in Europe, not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of infrastructure. So we must ask, did someone erase the Indus script, or did it simply fade? What makes this question harder to answer is the lack of names. The Indus seals do not celebrate kings. They do not list dynasties. They do not record conquests or victories. There are no boasts, no laments, no oaths of allegiance, just signs. It's tempting to believe that behind those signs are individual people, traders, priests, weavers, officials, that someone carved those symbols with care, that each one meant something very specific, and perhaps it did. One theory, proposed by Indian epigraphist Iravatham Mahadevan, suggests that the script encodes a Proto-Dravidian language, early form of the language family spoken today in southern India. In this view, the seals contain personal names, titles, and professions. The fish symbol might represent the word min, which means star in Tamil, used in poetic or divine contexts. Other symbols may denote professions like smithing, weaving, or farming. But these interpretations, though thoughtful, remain speculative. Because we do not know what the words sound like, we have no way to test the theory against a known language. No ancient Dravidian dictionary from 2000 BCE, no bilingual tablet saying, "This is the seal of Magellan." It's a copper trader. Another idea suggests that the script wasn't even phonetic. Perhaps it was a visual code symbols representing clans, social roles, or property rights. More like heraldry than language. In that case, there would be no grammar to discover. Just a system of emblems. Or maybe it was both a hybrid of sound and symbol, like Japanese, where kanji express meaning and kana express sound. Without long texts, we cannot know. And yet, as frustrating as this is, the Indus script still teaches us something profound. That complexity doesn't always come with fanfare. That an entire civilization can operate with extraordinary coordination without leaving a decipherable word. That silence can be sophisticated. This challenges our assumptions. We often equate writing with civilization and literature with advancement. But the Indus world reminds us that systems matter just as much as stories. Their towns functioned, their goods moved. Their people thrived for centuries, without empires, without temples, without war monuments, without a written legacy we can read in. This silence, we might reflect on our own world. We document everything: tweets, messages, reports, stories. But will any of it survive 4,000 years? Or will archaeologists of the future find only fragments, thumb drives, bits of plastic, a few symbols, and no idea what we meant? As you rest deeper into that thought, consider this: the next Indus seal may already lie in the soil, waiting to be unearthed. It may bear a combination of symbols, never seen before, one that finally cracks the code. Or it may not, and we may never know what they said. You might imagine a small figure bent over a clay seal, carving grooves into the wet surface with the careful patience of someone who understands time differently. No clock ticks in their world, only the setting sun, the hush of cattle returning, the flicker of hearth fires in the distance. They do not know that what they are writing will become unreadable. They only know it must be written. This final section begins not with a revelation, but with a whisper. We do not know the names of the people who invented the Indus script. That alone makes it almost unique. We know of Mohenjo-Daro in Sumer, the earliest named author. We know of Egyptian scribes and Chinese diviners who left the records. We know the laws of Hammurabi, the letters of Assyrian queens, the receipts of Babylonian grain stores. But from the Indus Valley, silence, not a single name, not one. And this makes the Indus script not only unreadable, but unpeopled. A language without a speaker, a grammar with no voice, a record with no author. It is this very absence that gives it its power. For those who've devoted their lives to deciphering the script, there is no shortage of effort. Scholars from around the world have tried everything: frequency analysis, symbol clustering, statistical modeling, and even artificial intelligence. Some have proposed that the script isn't even linguistic, that it might be a non-linguistic symbol system used for trade, marking ownership, or religious ritual, like branding. Others insist it must be a language. It's too many repeated sequences, too much internal consistency. But consistency does not mean legibility. Take, for instance, the unicorn symbol, one of the most common motifs on Indus seals. Despite the name, it probably isn't a mythical creature at all. Most likely, it's a stylized bull. Its body turned sideways, with only one horn shown to the viewer. But this image appears again and again, paired with varying lines of script. Some seals show it in front of a ritual stand or a manger. What does it mean? Is it a sign of status, a profession, a clan symbol, a religious image, a pun? No one knows. Some seals are simpler. A short sequence of symbols, perhaps 3 or 4 characters pressed into a small button-sized token. Other inscriptions, like those found on large copper tablets or pottery fragments, stretch a bit longer, rate to 10 characters. But even the longest Indus texts contain fewer than 30 signs. That's not much to go on. Linguists often need far more to identify syntax, word order, case endings, verb forms. With only short strings, all that vanishes. Now imagine trying to understand English from the word cat, then dog, then then nothing. No Rosetta Stone, no context, no translation, no surviving descendant language, no speakers, and yet, despite all this, people persist. One promising approach came from Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel in the early 2000s. They controversially argued that the Indus script might not be a script at all, not in the conventional sense. According to their theory, it lacked the necessary complexity to be a full language. Instead, suggested it was a set of religious or symbolic icons, like emblems or teles. This would explain the short length of inscriptions and the lack of longer texts. But critics pushed back. The brevity of inscriptions doesn't prove they weren't linguistic. Many known scripts, like those used for votive offerings or coin inscriptions, so similarly short. Moreover, statistical studies conducted later, particularly by Reichrow and colleagues, demonstrated that the sequence patterns in the Indus signs showed statistical entropy, a measure of predictabilities similar to that found in real languages. This doesn't confirm that the script is linguistic, okay? But it does suggest a structured system more than random symbols. And so, the debate continues, moving slowly across academic, key, journals, and dusty conferences. There are other theories too. Some believe the script could be an early Dravidian language, perhaps connected to Tamil, which is still spoken today. Others think it might be linked to Munda, or other ancient languages of India now fading into obscurity. Some speculate it reflects a now extinct linguistic family, lost with the cities. But speculation, no matter how well reasoned, can't substitute for evidence. There are no long texts in the Indus world, no scrolls, no tablets with 20 lines of text, no religious hymns, no market records, no burial inscriptions, just seals, pottery, etched tokens. The medium, too, presents challenges. Most of the signs were carved into steatite, a soft soapstone that was then fired. Others were stamped into clay, inscribed on copper, or painted onto jars. The surviving examples were found mostly in urban context, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, and Lothal, suggesting their use was connected to trade or civic activity. And while many are beautifully preserved, the symbols themselves resist certainty. Some are clear and distinct. Others are worn, broken, or partial. And even when a sign is legible, its meaning isn't. You may be tempted to think that modern computing will solve the mystery. Okay, that with enough data and enough AI, the puzzle will eventually yield. But what if the puzzle is missing key pieces? I can analyze patterns, but it cannot generate meaning from silence. To train a model to decode a script, you need a corpus, a bilingual text, a known meaning. Without it, even the best algorithms can only generate probabilities, not certainties. Still, there's hope. In 2023, archaeologists uncovered new Indus artifacts in Haryana, including a remarkably intact seal with a long, uninterrupted inscription. Perhaps more will follow. Perhaps some dusty corner of the subcontinent still holds a bilingual inscription, Harappan sign, paired with a known language that would change everything. Until then, we're left with echoes. The Harappans, we believe, wrote to mark Dene, to identify. Their seals may have denoted ownership, Vijayas grain, Vikram's cloth, Devas, copper, or perhaps they indicated profession, potter, trader, priest. But even if we never know exactly what they wrote, we can say this: They wrote. They made the effort. They carved carefully. They sealed goods. They stamped bricks. And that act of writing, whatever it meant, is itself a message. A message that says, we were here. We organized. We believed. We belonged. It's easy to romanticize a mystery, to turn silence into magic. But the real beauty of the Indus script is not its unknowability. It's its persistence. Despite war, climate change, colonization, and time, it endures, unbroken, undecoded, somewhere beneath a collapsed wall or inside a sealed jar. The next piece waits, a sign pressed into clay by a person long dead, whose name we may never know, who wrote with no thought of legacy, only purpose. Perhaps they wrote to keep track of a shipment, or to make an offering, or to name a child. Whatever they wrote, they did so with care, and perhaps that is enough. So tonight, as you drift further into rest, think of them not as vanished, but as waiting, waiting not for discovery, but for understanding, for someone who will not just read, but listen, for someone who will sit quietly, the hush of evening, and whisper, what were you trying to say? It's good night. It's good night.